Realized less than 2 years after the death of the artist, this exhibition corrects the injustice towards Branka Uzur. In her homeland, she did not achieve the valorization that her work deserves, partly because she lived for a long time, from the end of the 80s, in Cyprus and Australia, but mostly because she predominantly dealt with ceramics, which is neglected and not taken very seriously in Croatian art. An interesting and distinctive artist with a dynamic life path, Branka Uzur did not achieve the recognition and valorization that her work deserves in her homeland, partly because she lived in Australia from the end of the 80s, but mostly because she was dominantly engaged in ceramics, which in Croatian art has long times neglected and not taken seriously. Her retrospective exhibition in the Glyptoteca testifies, indirectly, to another time, in which ceramic sculpture enjoyed dignity and respect. At the end of the 70s of the last century, during the golden age of ceramics, Branka Uzur left the Academy of Applied Arts in Belgrade, today's Faculty of Applied Arts of the University of Arts in Belgrade, as a mature and self-aware artist full of desire to experiment. The introductory part of the exhibition in the Glyptoteca shows that these experiments were largely successful. Her reliefs in baked earth, depictions of harlequins, a motif that attracted her with its unfortunate melancholy, and to which she returned in a series of watercolors, oils on canvas and painted ceramic plates, are on display. She received a strong incentive to research various motifs and various techniques from two professors at the Academy, Mirjana Isakovic and Branimir Stajevic, who spent years in Sweden and passed on his new experiences about Scandinavian ceramics to students. Through him, Branka Uzur developed a preference for stoneware, fireclay, highly fired ceramics colored with oxides. She continued to work with stoneware throughout her life. After returning from her studies in Zagreb, she made them at the ceramics factories Zagorka and Budikovcina. It was then that her spindle-shaped sculptural forms, which the author called shells, were created. The so-called forms were created in Budikovcina in 1981 and 1982. Art critic Lida Rojdapolo considers them the most interesting sculptural works in this exhibition, and they are monolithic sculptures with rounded edges that the author depicts with freely applied geometric shapes. Realized posthumously, less than 2 years after the death of the artist, this exhibition corrects the injustice against Branka Uzur. At the head of this mission is the author of the exhibition, Lida Rojdapolo, who wrote an inspired and richly informative text with an overview and analysis of all phases of the artist's work for the extensive catalogue of the exhibition. In addition to ceramic sculpture and useful ceramics, Branka Uzur also left behind an impressive amount of drawings, sketches, large portraits for which she received several awards in Australia, and which are now in private collections from which, due to limited funds, they could not be delivered to Zagreb and included in this exhibition. The fact that Branka Uzur, along with many other artists who were engaged in ceramic sculpture and useful ceramics, was given the opportunity to create their works in the crystal glass factory in Samobor, which in the 1980s allowed many artists to work, speaks of the support that ceramics enjoyed in the former state. In their plans, they had material at their disposal, excellent working conditions, but also the support and mentoring of master glaziers. In Samobor, Branka Uzur got acquainted with the technology of working in cast crystal glass, which requires speed and dexterity in modeling and processing. Beautiful transparent sculptures made of yellow cast glass, reminiscent of melted and painted whitefish, remain from that period. In 1983, Branka Uzur received the 7 Secretaries of Skaja Award in Zagreb. A conscious social criticism can also be read from the artist's constant return to motifs of the female body, and this is also evidenced by the name she gave to some of her works. Several sculptures are called Sister Wants to Fly or Fear of Flying, and refer to Erika Jong's novel Fear of Flying, in which the main character, Isadora is afraid of flying in every possible sense. Branka's sisters are torn between desire and possibility. They want to fly, but their feet are stuck to the ground. Even the fascinating winged female being fails to fly because her magnificent wings are glued to the ground, points out Retrospective. Even in his later works, drawings and ceramics, a large dose of cynicism and self-irony can be noticed, most often directed towards the role of women in contemporary society and the stereotypes related to that role. Her critique of patriarchy is sharp and intelligent, but also playfully playful. In 1988, Branka Uzur moved to Cyprus. She applied to the international competition of the United Nations and got the job of head of the international project for the promotion of fine crafts in Nicosia and spent 4 years working there. When she finished the UN project in Cyprus, in 1992, he went to Australia, to Sydney. In this new cultural environment, which showed no traces of a special affection for ceramics, the artist began to turn more and more to painting. She painted portraits, animals, cars and furniture, mostly on large canvases. For her portraits of famous Australians, she won recognition and several important awards. Particularly interesting are the portraits of contemporaries, painted almost life-size, placed frontally in static poses, without any indication of movement. Also interesting is the depersonalized cycle of paintings with furniture, armchairs, stools and beds, and the cycle of paintings with cars. The author managed to show the vanity of a furniture showroom or a car showroom on canvas. These are symbols of the consumer society of our everyday life and fragments of modern life that surround us, banal scenes painted without commentary. Intentionally depersonalized, Branka's paintings base their expressiveness on the combination of color and shape and on their correlation, points out Retrospective, who notes that Branka Uzur's painting is largely based on the experience of pop art and contemporary design. I was intrigued by Charles Blackman's exceptional portraits, charcoal drawings created at the end of the 90s, when the author intensively socialized with this famous Australian artist. Branka volunteered in an association that took care of old artists who were not cared for by anyone. Charles Blackman was a bohemian and an alcoholic, and he also suffered from dementia. She spent time with him by drawing and talking together. Then these portraits of an aging artist were created, very lively and immediate. In the last years of her life, Branka Uzur obsessively kept an unusual artistic diary. In fact, these are thick drawing pads full of pencil drawings, created between 2004 and the last days of his life. They contain hundreds of sketchy, fast-moving portraits of people whom the artist met or socialized with more intensively. She would often ask unknown people to pose. Everyone was always happy to agree. The portraits were created on the spot, in a minute or two. I keep these cartoons as diaries. The portraits have dates, the times and names of the places where they were created, wrote Branka Uzur. She returned to Croatia a few years ago. She bought an apartment in Opatija and lived there until her death. What remains after visiting the exhibition is a feeling of some vague sadness and melancholy interwoven with humor and irony. Her ceramics is a refined parody, often crazy, full of imaginative solutions and ambiguous messages, notes Retrospective.